Good afternoon, bird class. Given the rate of comments in the chat about everybody finding the lizard, looks like this week was an easy one. Certainly when I look at this on my computer screen, it looks much easier than when I saw this image originally on my phone and was trying to find the lizard. So I guess that means next time I do one of these lizard ones, I should do a harder one, right? If you didn't see it, our little lizard is right here on the trunk of the tree. All right, we've got the usual suspects due on Sunday, February 20th before midnight, the quiz and the short answer one. Do they have a bird version? No. Well, there's not a regular posting of find the bird images. That would be really cool. The bird focused game that I'm aware of is they show you a photo of a bird's crest and ask you to identify it, which if you're not seriously obsessed with birds and don't know a lot of birds, it's just very, very challenging. I will see if I can find some pictures of birds that are hard to find. All right. And I'm making a note to myself. Hang on just a sec. I'm going to, for over the weekend, I'm going to post a content area or module about the project that will include a place for you guys to submit your topic requests, because I'm getting a lot of them by email. So if I just put them in Blackboard, it's a little bit easier for me to keep track of them. So I'm going to put that on Blackboard before the next time we meet. Okay. So we've been talking about bird behavior. Just some kind of general ideas about how what wild birds do. How do they live their lives? How they are constantly active, how they are very social. They live in relatively large spaces. So you've seen birds flying. They'll fly for long distances and still be in their home territory. And we were talking about that to talk about how it relates to keeping them mentally healthy in captivity. And how the way birds live their lives means that in captivity, they need a lot of attention and a lot of mental stimulus. And I was kind of starting to talk about training at the end of the last class. So here at the bottom of the screen, there's a URL to a place that has a lot of good information on training captive birds. I'm not going to really go into a lot of detail about how to train birds. A lot of the things are exactly what you learned in dog training. Positive reward is the right thing to do. Negative response, punishment, that doesn't work very well with birds. It's more likely to get you bitten. So positive rewards, especially food rewards, are the right way to go with bird training. You can use a clicker. You guys, I'm assuming you're still doing clicker training in dog obedience class. Clickers are fabulous. They can be used to train dogs, cats, birds, bears, monkeys, alligators, you know, pretty much anything that can hear and can be trained, clicker training works with it. I am sure that some birds learn to mimic that click. Yeah, that's a good point, Fiona. They'll make that sound and then try and get you to give them a treat. Birds are very clever. It's also a good idea to target training. So you can see this person has a stick in their hand and the bird is reaching out and touching the end of the stick with their beak. And that can be used to coerce the animal to move around, to convince them to move to a slightly different place. It also helps if you are wanting to, for example, look at their belly. You can hold the target high up and they'll reach up to it. You can see their belly or their chin really good. So target training is good. There is also a technique where you train them to home, or what's called station. And so the station command, you make a sound, you can say a word, or you can use like a bell or a whistle, and can use train the bird that when they hear that sound, they go to a specific location. Homing pigeons, they don't have to train homing pigeons to go home. Once the homing pigeon knows where home is, they just go there. I'm talking about if the bird is in your house, giving it this command and having it go to its cage. This is potentially useful if your bird gets out. If you're using a loud noise like a whistle or a bell, if the bird hears that, it might come back, especially if you carry the cage outside, or use like a brightly colored ball or mat or something to convince the bird this is what you go to when you hear that sound. You can carry it outside, give them the signal, the bird might come back. It's one of the tricks that sometimes works with birds that have just gotten out. And of course, reward them for behaving when you're trimming their nails, for handling them. Going into a crate is really important. All of these things are valuable. Yep, you can train, training your chickens using a pan. Yep, that's a good way to do it. Absolutely. There was a case kind of early on when people were starting to do a lot more training with exotic animals. A agouti got loose at the zoo in Texas. I don't know if you know what an agouti is. They are small. They look almost like long-legged guinea pigs. It's a Central American mammal, and it got out. Now, before they had, modern training techniques, they probably never would have found the animal again. But they had an alarm sound that told all the animals to go to their station. And the agouti was trained to go to a mat on the floor, a specific mat. And so they put the mat down and made that sound, and out comes the agouti from its hiding place and goes right to its mat. And they were able to recapture it. So it is definitely a valuable tool in your little toolbox. And towels. Towels are a bird owner's best friend. If you handle your bird a lot and train them, give them all these positive rewards, you may never really need to restrain them tightly. But if they have a veterinary emergency and the bird is freaked out, you may need to use a towel. Or if you aren't being as successful with your training, you may need to use a towel. So a bird that is wrapped in a towel is easier to control. And of course, if your bird is used to a towel, they're going to be much more comfortable with this idea. So I really like doing this with birds kind of as a routine basis. You can see this macaw, he is completely comfortable in that towel. So I have a towel. I have a bird. Daphne says hi. When you are wrapping a bird in the towel, you do want to cover their head. Make sure their wings are down so they're not sticking out. And just kind of gently wrap the towel around their body. Now, you can't see her at all. I've got her little feet sticking out. That's fine. You gently hold the bird through the towel. And if we're doing nail trimmings, you can leave her feet out and you have access to them and you can trim her nails while still restraining her. Once your bird gets used to that, if it has to go to the vet, if it's got a major emergency, the vet can do the same thing. Wrap the bird in a towel as part of the restraint and then, trim the beak or whatever part of the body the vet needs to get to. And a lot of birds, yes, some birds will learn to like the towel. They like to hide under the towel. Peekaboo. I've seen birds play peekaboo before. Towels are great with a lot of difficult animals. I have all of the cats that I have were originally feral, and most of them have come around a little bit, but I've got one that is just still incredibly skittish. We've had him for 7 years, and he's okay being in the room with us, but he does not want to be touched. So when it's time to trim his nails, we hate this. We've been working on training him and it just doesn't seem to be working with him. But when it's nail trimming time, we get out a big towel, we wrap it around him, and he calms down. He knows what we're doing. So we can have him wrapped up, partially wrapped up in this towel, and one of us is just kind of holding him and the other one's trimming his nails. And he's just much more relaxed than if we tried to grab him and didn't have him wrapped in a towel. That would result in Band-Aids. Absolutely. Yeah, cats are hiders. It's part of, we think of cats as predators, but a cat the size of a house cat can also be a prey for other species, dogs, hawks, owls, larger animals of various kinds. So yeah, feeling hidden does kind of make them feel safer. So birds can develop bad behaviors. The two biggest reasons birds develop bad behaviors. Three: boredom, stress, and loneliness. And when a bird experiences these emotions, they will sometimes start feather plucking. So this macaw has pulled out all of the feathers here on its abdomen and chest and on its legs. You see this line down the center? That's where the keel is. So remember, we talked about how their breastbone looks like a T. You can actually see this end of the breastbone because there are no feathers there. Once a bird starts plucking feathers, it's almost impossible to get them to stop, even if you remove the negative stimulus. Yes, it hurts them. It's kind of like people who do cutting, where they're having so much psychological pain that physical pain is almost a relief. It gives them a relief from the boredom or the loneliness or the stress. So prevention is the best tool for a bird that plucks feathers like this. Just give them mental stimulus. Give them attention. Don't let them get to this point. If they get to this point, then there are things that need to be done. You can get birdie versions of Elizabethan collars. You can put sweaters on them to keep them from plucking. If you have a bird and it starts feather plucking, take it to an avian vet. Because while it can be boredom and stress, it can also be a sign that they have some disease. They will feather pluck if they're having a lot of abdominal pain, for example. So certain conditions will cause them to pluck their feathers out too. Birds, the kind of birds that we keep in captivity, their defense mechanism is usually biting. Okay, there was an excellent question. It disappeared before I spotted the name. If a bird starts feather plucking for disease, will it stop? It is more likely to stop if it's a disease-related feather plucking. So, okay, it's from Tawny. Some birds will develop the habit, but a lot of birds will, once they have relief from the pain and discomfort, will go back to normal. It's much more likely in those situations than in mental health related situations. Okay. So biting. In the wild, birds generally don't bite each other. They preen each other. They will threaten each other with an open beak, but they're not as likely to bite. But it's harder for birds to communicate with us. Their body language is different than human body language or dog and cat body language. Humans can read dog body language pretty well, but when you get away from dogs, some of the body language is consistent. You know, a lot of the things you see in a dog, like the ears flat back pressed against the head, that's always, you know, any animal that does that, you should be watching out. They're stressed, they're fearful, or they're angry and aggressive. Well, birds don't have ears. I mean, they have ears, but they don't have stand-up ears. So you can't read their ears. So what do we look for? Let's see, did I put another picture in here? Yeah, here we go. This bird is threatening. The beak is open. You see the eyes and how they're very small pupils. The eyes, the pupil will open and close when a bird is stressed. So it's like it'll dilate and then contract and dilate and then contract. Body language. If their body is kind of flat, instead of sitting upright, they're leaning forward. Their tail is flared, so the feathers are flared open. That is a good sign that the bird is stressed or overstimulated or fearful. Biting must be dealt with. You don't want the bird to get used to biting you. Ideally, you figure out what the problem is. Why did the bird bite? Avoid that stimulus. Maybe the bird's not as comfortable being handled as you would like. Maybe you accidentally squeezed too hard while you were restraining it. Maybe it's just afraid of people. A lot of birds, especially early in their relationship with a person, will be pretty stressed. Mary, go ahead.
Is it normal for birds to automatically want to go to bite somebody?
I would not call it normal. I would call it a sign of stress or fear. That's more likely to be the cause, not just because they want to bite.
Okay.
You can also give the bird something better to chew on than your finger or your nose. So if the bird is biting because they're bored, they don't have enough to do, give them things to do. You should figure out the bird's favorite foods. We talked about using the best food to get them to go in their cage at night. Well, if you've got a bird that has a history of biting, use their favorite food when they're calm and they're not showing signs of aggression. Reward that calm behavior. Now, birds do naturally chew, especially the parrots. So giving them something to chew will keep them from biting the furniture, for example. And if you've got the bird sitting on your finger, I'm going to stop the share here. So here's Sassy. She's perched on my finger. I'm sorry, not Sassy. This is Daphne. What am I talking about? Daphne's perched on my finger and she bends down and bites me. The trick to do this is earthquake. You just shake your finger a little bit and the bird goes, wait, what? What's going on? Wait, what is that? You've just distracted them. And then put them down because they're kind of excited about something and they're likely to bite you again. But doing that shaking of the hand or dropping your hand a little bit, you don't want to give them a good shake, but you're just distracting them from biting you. That's all that does. Now, birds scream. When I've taught this class in person, I've just played a bird screaming without telling students what was going on. Could dilated eyes mean affection as well? Sometimes dilated eyes do mean affection as well. Yeah, you gotta practice reading the body language. It means excitement. Dilated eyes mean excitement, and that excitement can be positive or negative. That's a good question, or a good point, Fiona. Yep, judge it based on context. Exactly. It's exactly right, Faith. All right. So, birds in the wild. They live in large, noisy groups. They travel long distances, and they're likely to scream. They make loud noises to stay in touch with other members of their flock. And the longer distance communication, or the bigger the social group, the louder the birds tend to be. You cannot stop a bird from being noisy. You can reduce it. There are some things you can do to help this problem, but some birds are going to be noisy. This guy is a Nande conure, and they are screamers. So again, why is the bird screaming? Can you tell? Is it bored, frustrated? Does it want attention? If it's bored, frustrated, or wants attention, that means you need to step up the game. Give them more things to do. Give them more attention. Don't reward them for screaming, but just in general, give them more attention. You can also train the bird to do tricks. So anything you train the bird to do that you then reward with food is mental stimulation. And it can be things like step up, but you can also train them to roll over, just like you would train your dog to roll over. And if your bird is restless and has been really fussy and your neighbors are about to call the cops on you, get them to go through a couple of tricks. It distracts them from the screaming, and it gives them mental stimulation, which birds really, really, really need. So you guys understand that birds need mental stimulation and attention by now, right? I keep repeating it because a lot of people don't understand this about birds. And this is an aspect of bird care that is often neglected. Okay, so birds tend to be very social, and a lot of birds will pick one person that they like more than anybody else. This is natural behavior for wild birds. Parrots in the wild will have a mate that they spend most of their time with. So your bird may pick another bird to be its mate. It might pick you to be its mate. How can you tell? You see things like very close physical contact, mutual preening, and there's always the regurgitation. Yes, when birds are in love, they regurgitate for each other. So if your bird falls in love with you, it will regurgitate on your shoulder. It's just saying it loves you. Okay, so what was the second reason? The mutual preening. Yeah, mutual preening is pair bonding behavior. It's a way that they reinforce that bond between two birds. Yeah. With you, that means they'll nibble on your hair. Maybe they'll bite your earrings. when I was around captive parrots a lot, no, I never wore earrings. They were always pulling on them. Okay. So that's kind of the behavior. Again, this was all very general, talking primarily focused on behavior that we see in the kinds of birds we have in captivity. When we talk about falconry towards the end of the semester, which is keeping hawks and owls in captivity, those species have different behaviors than what we see with the parrots and the parakeets. But I wanted you guys to get the parrots and the budgies behavior, because that's mostly what you see in captivity. There are a lot of budgies as pets, and it's likely what you're going to be dealing with is the parrot type birds. So we're going to talk briefly about conures. So this is a sun conure, and conures are kind of between budgies and parrots. So they're bigger than budgies, smaller than parrots. Their lifespan is kind of in between those two. Their behavior is kind of in between those two types of birds. So the lifespan is between 20 and 40 years, depending on the species. And once again, the average lifespan is only 10 years. So when I say the lifespan is 20 to 40 years, that's with good care. So conures need more attention than budgies. They need more mental stimulus than budgies, but they don't need as much as the big parrots. And we can divide the conures into two groups. So we're going to start talking about the Aratinga conures. These include the sun conure. Some of these, there's the Nanday, the Jinday. You see a lot of these guys in captivity. The mitered, sometimes see. Some of these you don't see very often, but you know, sun conures, Jindays, Nandays, mitered, very popular in the pet stores. These guys are the larger group, and they range from 12 to 15 inches. So there's a ruler for you. That's 12 inches right there. So that's kind of the small size. And that's from the tip of the beak to the tip of the tail. So the body is only going to be about, you know, to there. These guys are the colorful ones, and they are the louder group. These guys come from South American jungles, so they have, ooh, that's not how you spell South. So they have to be loud so that other members of their flock can find them. These guys do not do as well in captivity as the other group we're going to talk about. And a lot of that is the noise. People think they know what they're getting into when they get a bird. And then when the bird screams all the time, and you can't stop that behavior, a Nanday conure is going to scream sometimes. A sun conure is going to scream sometimes. And a lot of people just cannot handle that. And they do that to communicate with each other or with you, or to try and attract a mate. So these guys tend to get rehomed way too often. This group, and I've never heard anybody pronounce this name. So Pirhura, maybe. I have no idea how to pronounce it because I've only seen it written. This group of conures, these are the better option. And they're often underappreciated. They're a little bit smaller, so they average about 10 inches. They're not as loud. So a green sheet conure, a maroon belly conure, blue-throated conure, they're not going to be screaming as much or as loudly as the sun conures and the Nandays. Regardless, both of these groups are very social and need lots of attention. So I like this group for people who want a parrot, but don't necessarily want to have a bird that's going to live longer than they are. So again, a little bit smaller, little shorter lifespan, but still have a lot of that parrot personality that people like, that highly curious, highly interactive kind of behavior. Very entertaining. These guys live similar to the Aratingas, so between 20 and 40 years if they're well cared for. I mean, I can handle a pet that lives 20 years. I'm not going to be able to handle a pet that lives 100 years, which some of the big parrots do. Okay. So care for these guys. A lot of the things we learned about with budgies apply to these guys. When it comes to caging, bigger is better. And time out of the cage is even more important than it was with the budgies. And again, this is metal. The bars are spaced so the bird can't get his head through it. And lots of toys. Change them frequently. Give them things to destroy. Birds love to destroy things. They need attention. They need entertainment. This bird is good. These birds are good for people who work from home, for example, or somebody stays home a lot of the time and doesn't go out to work. If it's a household where people are gone 40 hours a week at work routinely, that's not great for any of the conures. They need more attention than that. They need more interaction than that. But they will reward you because they like to cuddle, especially the one that I can't pronounce, conures, Pirhura conures. This is a green cheek, and you can just see, look how comfortable that bird is. Just laying in the person's hand, Do, 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 do. Happy little bird. You will see these guys bite if they are stressed or not mentally stimulated enough. You will see these guys do feather plucking if they're not stimulated enough. You tend not to see that, or you tend not to see feather plucking so much in budgies. They do need mental stimulation, but not as much. Okay, so that's some stuff about conures. Any questions on this group of birds? Okay. Since we've gotten through the general care that's consistent across all types of birds, as we go through groups, I'll be talking about things that make them unique and different than other groups of birds we've talked about, and not so much about the details of cleaning the cage and what to feed them. We know that by now. We've talked about that. So what I want to talk about now is evolution. So I like this image. Unfortunately, I've never been able to figure out who the original artist is. It is all over the internet, but I can't track down the person who drew it originally. And it kind of shows an idea of evolution from a theropod dinosaur up to a blue jay. So you guys probably know a little bit about evolution. When we talk about evolution, we are talking about a change in a species over generations. So when biologists talk about evolution, we're not talking about change in an individual. We're talking about changes over generations. So a change between you and your great-grandparents or your great-great-great-great-grandparents. In the time period that we're talking about, how long it takes before we see evolution depends on the rate of reproduction. So how fast a species reaches sexual maturity and produces their offspring. With birds, they reach sexual maturity. Most species of songbirds reach sexual maturity within, 1 to 2 years. Larger birds can take more than that. What do I mean? How long until we see evolution? So what I mean is, if we look at this guy here that's got a blue head, he's got feathers, but he still has teeth instead of a beak. It's going to take, when I say time until we see it, I'm talking about time until we go, oh, hey, this guy has a beak now. He's lost his teeth. We can see an obvious, clear, visual change. There can be small changes that occur constantly, but they're not always obvious when they happen. Let's talk dog breeding. When we breed dogs, we are breeding for certain characteristics, certain traits, and we might be breeding to get rid of other traits. It is an artificial form of evolution. If you look at, oh, let's go find some pictures. All right, you go away. If we look at modern day bulldogs, you know, this is what we're looking at, right? We're looking at these very short faces, these underbite on the jaw, lots of wrinkles. But if we look at bulldogs, let me see if I can find an older image. Here we go. So these bulldogs, their teeth fit in their mouth. Their noses are a little bit longer. They don't have quite as many wrinkles. The further back in time, this is also a bulldog. It's got a longer nose. The jaw sticks forward a little bit. The lower jaw does stick forward a little bit, but the teeth stay in the mouth. Doesn't have quite as many folds on the face. We have bred from this kind of a dog to this kind of a dog. And yes, the modern day bulldogs have a lot of problems, huge health problems. Yes, Frenchies do as well. Pugs do as well. Boston Terriers do as well. Cavalier King Charles Spaniels, is that right? The
Yeah.
Cavaliers have horrible health problems because of what we've done to breed them. So when I talk about seeing a change, I'm talking about seeing the difference between bulldogs of a couple of 100 years ago and now. Does that help you guys understand what I'm talking about when I talk about these changes? Okay, good. It's hard for me not to go on a rant about brachycephalic dogs, but we are in a bird class. So one of the things that is not as obvious and that people tend to skip over is these traits that evolve and be added traits, new things, or traits can be lost. So bird ancestors had teeth. Modern day birds do not. They lost that trait. Okay, and I've got a lot of things to say, so we're going to go to the whiteboard. I'm going to write a whole bunch of stuff up here. All right, so evolution happens because nature is not stable. Things change. Change is a constant. It happens all the time. And what makes you well adapted to a certain situation, if your situation changes, you may not be as well adapted anymore. So if you've got I hate to do this, polar bears. Polar bears are highly adapted. They have evolved to be the perfect Arctic predator. Well, the Arctic is changing. Polar bears are having a harder time finding food. So one of two things is going to happen. Polar bears are going to evolve and find a new food source, or they're going to go extinct. The same is true. Yeah, sucks a lot. And I hate to get on this again. Here we go. I'm getting sidetracked. Because the climate is changing much faster than the rate of reproduction for polar bears, I don't hold out a lot of hope for them. Things that reproduce faster are more likely to be able to adapt to this, the really rapid change in the climate. So things change. Yep, they are mating with grizzly bears, and that might kind of save them, create a new hybrid species. I don't know what you mean by 9 years, Haley.
Like since 2014, they like said big polar bears are going extinct. Probably more than that, but I remember 2014.
Yep.
They said the ice cubes are melting.
Yep. Yep. Yeah, biologists have known that they were in trouble a lot longer than the average public seems to have been aware of it. Now, there are a lot of things that evolution is not. It does not move in a specific direction. If evolution could move in a specific direction, it would create polar bears who can eat things other than seals, who can successfully hunt things other than seals, who can tolerate warmer temperatures. But it doesn't do that. It does not create traits an organism needs. So it might be incredibly beneficial for an organism to have a new trait, but evolution doesn't create that. And it does not move towards perfection. It makes a species better adapted to current conditions. But conditions change. And evolution selects the best variation of a species. So I know that's probably a little confusing right now, but think about the variation in species. We can look at people, right? People are, some are big, some are little, some have dark skin, some have pale skin, some have dark hair, some have pale hair. All of these visibly obvious variations, as well as internal variations like different blood types, different ability to digest things like lactose. Faith, go ahead.
Yeah, so that got me thinking about there's a group of people in Southeast Asia that since they're like a coastal community, and rely on fishing and diving, they've developed unusually large spleens that act as oxygen stores, and so they can stay submerged for almost 15 minutes.
Yep. Yeah, that's a great example of variation within our species. You also see that with, you see similar things going on with the people who act as Sherpas up in the high altitudes of the Himalayas. They've lived there for centuries, and their blood can carry more oxygen, and they're better at extracting oxygen from the air. The air at the top of the Himalayas has a lower concentration of oxygen. If somebody like me goes up there, I'm gonna get tired easy, and I might get altitude sickness because I have trouble getting enough oxygen. But the locals have variation that gives them that advantage. And that is what evolution selects. That variation that makes that species or that population best suited for a specific set of conditions. And there are trade-offs. So a trait or a characteristic may be a benefit in some ways, but it may have another cost associated with it. And the big example here is human childbirth. Without modern medical care, around 1% of women would die in childbirth. That's a lot. Today, worldwide, it's about 1 per 30,000. Or in the US, 1 out of 23,000. We don't have great maternal care. Why would evolution select for something that kills off 1% of women? Well, the reason is the big brain. Childbirth in humans is difficult because we have huge brains and we have an upright posture. Walking upright changes the shape of the pelvis and makes it harder for us to give birth. And our babies have bigger brains, so that makes it harder for them to come out the birth canal. But those big brains and upright posture are so beneficial to our species that evolution selected those even at the cost of 1% of women dying in childbirth. They're just that big of an advantage. Is this making sense to people? Yep, good, excellent. Okay, I'm getting ready to change the screen. In order for evolution to occur, there must be certain things going on in the population. Variation among individuals. If we were all identical, there would be no variation for evolution to act on. There would be no, well, this person is more adapted to survive, so they're going to reproduce more, have more offspring. Their offspring would be more likely to survive. If we don't have that variation, we're not going to change as a species. Those trait differences must be heritable. They get passed from parent to offspring. There is competition for limited resources. So in the natural world, animals compete for food, shelter, habitat, water, mating opportunities, and only those that are best adapted are likely to be able to reproduce, survive and reproduce. If you don't have any competition and everybody survives and reproduces, you're not going to have evolution. The survival and reproduction are variable. Some survive and reproduce, others don't. If you don't reproduce, any traits that you have, you're not passing on to the next generation. Evolution doesn't care about you. You're an evolutionary dead end if you don't reproduce. Okay. So what causes the variation? Genetic mutations. So these mutations are the raw material of evolution. Now, when we talk about genetic mutations, most people tend to think of, genetic mutations that caused Peter Parker to become Spider-Man, or genetic mutations that cause harm or cancer. So when we're talking about evolution, genetic mutations must happen in what we call the germline. The germline being the cells that make sperm or become eggs. If you have a genetic mutation in your earlobe, it is not going to be passed on to your children. So evolution isn't going to act on that. It has to be in the cells that produce sperm and eggs. Not all genetic mutations have an effect. In fact, most genetic mutations do not have an effect. We all have had genetic mutations that have happened in our lifetimes. So most of them don't matter. If you have a genetic mutation in the enzyme that breaks down alcohol, but that genetic mutation takes place in a hair follicle on your head, who cares? You're not going to see that effect. Hair follicles don't make the enzyme that breaks down alcohol. Only liver cells make that. So those mutations don't matter. Faith, go ahead.
So I actually have an interesting story about mutations in my family. This is on my mother's side. So some of my some of my mom's brothers and some of their kids, like my cousins, some of them have an inverted chromosome. Yeah, they have an inverted chromosome, which doesn't seem to have any effect on anything other than their personality. Because what we've noticed is that the people that have this inverted chromosome tend to be a lot harder to deal with. They tend to be very self-righteous or very condescending, or just overall just have something that makes them not as likable as other people.
That's interesting.
Yeah, we call it the butthole gene.
I'm a little surprised at that one, because inversions are usually more problematic than smaller genetic mutations. So for those of you who are completely lost here, an inversion happens when,
That would be me.
that would be you. Okay, so we've got a chromosome. So this is a strand of DNA. And on this strand, we have gene A, B, C, and D. An inversion happens when a section of this chromosome flips upside down. And so you end up with gene A, but then you have gene C, then B, and then D. So the way your body uses your genes, the order matters. If your body is reading the information from this end to this end, and they're reading A, B, C, D, that is different information than if they're reading A, C, B, D. It's like if you write a word, let me here's a big word, onomatopoeia. But if you write on tamopoeia, that's not the same word. Same thing with the genes for an inversion. Does that help clear that up, Mary? Good. All right. So not all genetic mutations have an effect. Getting back to this, if genetic mutation has an effect, it is more likely to be harmful than beneficial. So it's the rare genetic mutation that is beneficial and in the right type of cells to be passed on to your offspring. Even so, even though these kinds of things are rare, 1 out of every 1,000 gametes, gametes means sperm or egg, has a new mutation. So that's actually pretty common, 1 out of every 1,000. And when you think about males produce billions of sperm, they're producing a lot of sperm with mutations. Women tend not to produce that many eggs, so it's not even likely that every woman will produce an egg that has a mutation, but every man will definitely produce sperm cells that have mutations. All right. This is an excellent place to stop. So, does anybody have questions about what we've been talking about so far? I've kind of been talking about some general stuff about evolution. We're going to talk a little bit more about some things that are specific to birds and their evolution next time we meet. All right. I guess I'll see you guys next week. Bye, everybody.
What was that project you were talking about earlier?
The project is part of your grade. So we don't have any major exams.
Bye.
Bye. But we do have a project, which is it's research. So you can pick a bird-related topic, and I've got options of those on Blackboard, or you can come up with your own. And you're going to do some internet research, read up about the topic, and then communicate what you found. And you can communicate by writing a paper, doing a presentation, making a TikTok video, writing an original song. I'm very flexible about how you communicate that kind of information.
Got it. Thanks.
You're welcome.
Have a good weekend.
You too. Bye.